and then God having Samuel pick him and this sort of thing. And when David went through difficulties with regards to fleeing from Saul and stuff, that God consistently rescued him, okay? And they oftentimes see this psalm as a prayer that was composed by David when he was fleeing the revolt of his son. If you're familiar with the scriptures, David's oldest son decided it was time for him to become king. And so he led a revolt. The son's name was Absalom. And he led a revolt against David and was actually fairly successful. And David had to flee Jerusalem and this sort of thing. And so the idea is that this is a prayer. He says, you've always saved me in the past, so I call on you now. He says, there is none like you among the gods, O Master, and nothing like your actions. And this idea, of course, it doesn't matter the gods of the people who come against me, because there's no God like my God. But the other thing that's important here is nothing like your acts. I think you know that we have a verse in scripture that's where God says, my ways are not your ways. And that's one of the reasons why when you bring a petition or a difficulty before God, you do not tell God the solution, okay? Because God does not think the way we do. I don't know if you've ever studied cybernetics, but this cybernetics is this business of putting people with different fields together. And the way they do this is by osmosis or whatever field you're in, you pick up a bunch of rules. And once you pick up those rules, they'll limit what you can do. I think probably one of the classic examples is the number of great inventions that have been made in dreams. The guy who invented the sewing machine, for instance, he had all the material, everything, and he simply could not invent the sewing machine. He thought it over and over again. And the invention of the sewing machine depends on the violation of one of the basic rules of sewing, which is you put the thread through the pointy end of the needle. Okay, everyone knows you put the thread through the other end, but to make a sewing machine, you have to put it through the pointy end of the needle. And that came to him in a dream. It could never occur to him. He was awake. The best thing, they did a deal in Texas at one time, and I don't know all the people involved, but one of them was someone whose job was to study reptiles. Another one was an engineer. There was a chemist, a couple things. But anyway, what they wanted to do was to build a storage unit in Texas, a large storage unit that would maintain the same temperature as constant temperature as cheaply as possible. So this was the first time they actually tried cybernetics, was they brought these people together who were really, unqualified at all for what they were doing. So the engineer's idea, of course, was a roof that he said could change colors, and the panels, could turn over, could be black on one side to absorb heat and white on the other to reflect heat. Because while it gets very hot in Texas, it also gets very cold at night. So set this whole thing up. And the guy whose job is studying reptiles said, there is a way that reptiles change color. So you wouldn't have to turn the panels over, like a chameleon. Now, how does a chameleon change color? A chameleon changes color because there are little spots of color in the chameleon, and they are activated. And depending on which one dominates, you have the colors change. I think, like if you get a full color printer, I think there are 4 color inks in it. And it mixes, it works on the same system. And so then the chemist told them about materials that expand in cold and contract in heat. and other materials that expand in heat and contract in cold. And so what they did was make the roof out of a black material with this white thing set in it. It gets really hot, the white expands, the top turns white. It gets really cold, it contracts, the top turns black. They got an almost constant temperature and nothing, and you don't put any energy into it. You don't have to turn panels, don't have to do anything. It just does it. But, you know, an engineer would never think of a material that changes color. And that's just not the way you go about it. And if you've been trained to study reptiles, the thought of building a building doesn't occur to you, okay? So, I mean, but the thing is that the person in the field ends up limited by, you know, all the advances made in the past. You just end up limited. But cybernetics enables people to break through that, to see the different things. Well, and oftentimes I think when we come before God, we're like one person, we have one little way of looking at it. God is cybernetics on steroids. When God looks at a situation, God sees 1,000 ways of solving it, and he solves it whichever is best at this time. But God sees all kinds of ways. You and I are oftentimes lucky to find one, you know, like if, you know, all my financial thing would be solved if I won the lottery. Well, at least you found one, you know. Some people don't even find one, as irresponsible as the lottery is. I mean, at least you found it. But this idea of when we bring them before God, remember that no one acts like our God acts. And me, first of all, I don't act like our God acts. So when I ask his help, you know, I oftentimes think it's a good thing I was never elected God, but I oftentimes think, you know, that when someone turned, you know, God, would you please just let it rain? I would go, do it yourself. You know, if you want a solution, give me a problem. But if you know the solution, go ahead and do it, you know. So anyway, verse 9, he says, all nations you made will come and bow before you, Master, and will honor your name. For you are great and work wonders. You alone are God. And the concept here is that over a period of time, in the way God acts, people, first of all, should discover that our God responds to prayers and other gods don't. So they should recognize this in God. And this requires a couple of things. It requires, number one, to be very open about what God has done in your life, okay? And that's one of the reasons why it's good to have a small sharing group. You know, that if Teresa of Avila interprets the text, I think it appears in Luke, it's don't throw your pearls to the swine. And Teresa of Avila says that you need to have a group of people of like beliefs that you can share your experiences of God. And an example would be and this is a frequent example in my life as I get older, and I really should warn people about this. I keep Anthony rather busy. And so if you call on him and don't get a response, know where he is, okay? But you know, I'm sure this occurs to many of you just as frequently, but one time I couldn't find, I searched the entire house and could not find my glasses. And so I prayed to Anthony, and not finding glasses is a very difficult thing because I have 9 pairs stationed around the house. So anyway, and so I prayed to St. Anthony, and then as I turned to flick on the light for the room I was to go in, there was a mirror in front of me showing me my glasses on top of my head, okay? And so for me, and I will hold it forever, that's a miracle. I said the prayer, I got the answer. Like, you say that to someone else, they laugh. But say it to a believer, they can enjoy it, but they still know it's a miracle, you know? And that's what we want. We want to be able to enforce that, because a lifetime of that is what builds our faith. That over and over again, we realize that God does respond. He responds to that. And I mentioned to you before that if you give a petition, don't get a response, make sure you do not forget the petition, because it will be answered. And, you know, I'm not making this up. It says everyone is heard. Every door is opened. I mean, there's no ambiguity in the text about prayer. But I think so many people forget what they have asked for. Because let's face it, this afternoon, you'll have a new problem, okay? So I think a lot of us just forget what we've asked for. And when it happens, the thing that could build our faith, and believe me, if you come out of a situation with stronger faith, that's better than any miracle you found. That's what you want. And that's what this does. So we call, and he's very different. But over a period of time, that is what should draw people to believe in our God, is the knowledge that our God acts, and our God acts very differently than just another human being. He says, teach me, O Lord, your way. I walk in your truth. Make my heart one to fear your name. And again, awe. Make my heart one that stands in awe of you. And this, to walk in your truth, I think maybe many years ago, people wouldn't have understood that. But right now, the United States is an excellent example of two truths. And we choose the one we walk in, you know, and to one truth, nothing else matters. To the other truth, nothing else matters. And it is a way of viewing everything. And people never stand back and objectively look at things, neither side. Actually, so I remember someone asking me whether I watch Fox News. And I said, no, I've never watched it. They said, oh, you're an MSNBC person. I said, I've never watched that either. I consider those two absolute extremes, you know. When I watch news, I watch the BBC. They're civilized, you know. So they've been at it longer. But the idea is that we're become a society where we don't walk in the truth. I walk in my truth. And we don't want to be that, you know, this idea, we want to walk in God's truth. So he says, he goes on, let me acclaim you, O Master, my God, with all my heart, and let me honor your name forever. And these honor your name, you'll notice things, an example is the Lord's Prayer, hallowed be your name. This is a substitute text. There have been several times in the history of the Bible where someone with a certain optic has gone through and edited the text. One of the things that's very fortunate for scripture scholars is no one has ever had all the texts at once when they did it. And that's because the Jewish scriptures was in a collection of scrolls. So no one had a complete collection. But one of the things is they would never speak God's name. So again, an Orthodox rabbi, the first line of Genesis is, in the beginning, Yahweh created heaven and earth. And if you ever go to an Orthodox synagogue and they begin that text, the rabbi will pick up the book and he will say, in the beginning, the name created heaven and earth. They will never speak it, but they say the name. And that's what happened to this text. It says, you know, someone would fear Yahweh. But someone edited the text and said, someone will fear your name, okay? But it isn't, I mean, who could fear his name? It's this idea of stand in awe of God. And we want God to teach us his way, okay? And again, I think of, I'm not a great fan of generic medicines. And one of the reasons is, something someone told me years ago. And they have exactly the same ingredients and everything. But the person who was talking to me said, if I gave you and Julia Child the exact same ingredients, do you think you'd end up with the same thing? I had to admit no. And I'm sure Julia would have screamed no. But the fact of the matter is, that we want to know the way God does things. We want to watch the way God deals with people. That's why we should be forgiving. We should be forgiving because God forgives, and we want to be like God, and we want to forgive like God forgives. We want to forgive in such a way that we've forgotten what's wrong. One of the tragedies is we don't have that kind of control over ourselves, but that's what we want to do, that we want to learn to walk closely with God. This idea of becoming godly, we are commanded by God to become godly, to become like God. This is the life we intend to live forever. For your kindness to me is great, and you saved me from the nethermost Sheol. Sheol is a term which refers basically to being dead. It's not heaven or hell, okay? It's just to be in Sheol is to be dead. The Jews, as I mentioned, their views of everlasting life are very foggy, but this idea of coming into the away from this world is to be in Sheol. But it's not heaven, it's not hell, it's not even purgatory. He says, "O God, the arrogant rose against me. A band of the violent sought my life. They did not set you before them." 15. But you, Master, are a merciful and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast kindness. This steadfast kindness, again, is that word hesed, which is that really bonding love, that God acts in that way. And this idea about God being merciful and gracious and everything is really interesting. We go through all these qualities of God when we think of God in relationship to us. But we don't oftentimes think of those qualities in relationship to God. You remember the parable, I think it was a parable. It might actually have been an event. Remember, a young man came up to Jesus in the scriptures and said, "Tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." And, you cannot take Jesus as an ally against anyone, even if they're wrong. You cannot claim Jesus as an ally against anyone. Because the graciousness that God extends to me, if I push an enemy in his face, he's still going to extend that graciousness to them. My God forgives. My God is gracious. And we want to become like that God and make it as widespread in everything as is God. So slow to anger and steadfast in kindness. Turn to me, verse 16, give your strength to your servant and rescue your handmaid's son. Okay. And so this idea of rescue your handmaid's son, you'll see a couple of times in the text, and it refers to my place in Israel, that I come from the tradition. It could also refer to some very devotional parents. And, we aren't really sure how the particular writing refers to. It says, "Show me a sign for good, that those who hate me may see and be shamed. For you, Lord, have helped me and consoled me." And not only do we want to see God act towards us, but we want to see people in the world know God has acted towards us. That's the idea of making the miracles that God places in your life and these things, the idea of making them known, because then as a community, we have the ability to make this known generally, but it starts out in a community where we enforce it with one another. I'll give you the model of this. The model of this is found in the Acts of the Apostles. There was a home, and it's the home where the Last Supper took place. And that is the home of the man who wrote the account that we know as the account of Mark, the gospel. He was a little boy, and that was his family home. And they probably had the Last Supper there because of its place in Jerusalem. And what happened is that with the crucifixion of Jesus, the apostles and everything were absolutely terrified. They thought the Romans were after them, but the Romans knew how terrified they were, and they weren't the least bit worried about them. So they were hiding in this room, the upper room. And while they're hiding in the upper room, if you remember, some women initially come to them and say that the body's gone, the tomb's empty, and some characters in the tomb told us that he was risen from the dead, okay? And so what they do is they decide to send someone out to find out. So they send John and John and Peter, and they discover that the tomb is empty, but the one who wanted to go with them was Mary Magdalene, but they were running and she couldn't keep up with them. So they see the empty tomb, and John, because of his mysticism or whatever it is, he looks at the cloths and he knows Jesus is risen from the dead. One of the reasons is the cloths that clothe the body are laying on the rock like an empty cocoon. The cloths are just laying there. And the cloth that had covered the face is off at the side. And so he figures, you know, if you're going to steal a body, would you want to wrap a dead body, lift it out, re-prepare the wrappings, and lay them there? No, you'd get the body and get out of there as fast as possible, you know? So he comes to the conclusion, Jesus is risen from the dead, just by looking at it. And so they carry this news back. And when they're gone, Magdalene has gone into the tomb. And then she's actually encountered Jesus when she comes up. So they come in, and first of all, Peter and John give their testimony. Then the next thing is Magdalene comes in and gives her testimony. The next thing is the two people on their way to Emmaus who fled the city early in the day, they come in and give their testimony. And you watch in that room, the unthinkable becomes undeniable. But it's a slow process. It takes a lot of people who've seen Jesus in one way or another in different places, and they gather it. And see, essentially the church, this is the community where each one of us has been given one little piece in that puzzle. And if we can come together as a community and assemble that puzzle, for us, the unimaginable will become absolutely true. We know. And by the time that day ends with the different people who came in, by the time that day ends, those people in that room did not believe Jesus was risen from the dead. They knew he was risen from the dead. Then they had the power to go out and convert the entire world. Every one of them, with the exception of John, will die for Jesus in the process. But oftentimes, because of the way communities are structured, we never get to bring in the little piece that we have and share it with anyone to find it enforced and united to the next piece. But that's what we're called to do as a community. That's what the church is. We are the gathering of people to whom Jesus has revealed himself. And if all these pieces are put together, the resurrection of Jesus is undeniable. And why is that important? Because when Jesus rose from the dead, so did we. So if his resurrection can become absolutely undeniable for us, the assurance that you carry when you walk the face of the earth is unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. Psalm 87. And this is for the Korahites, a psalm and a song. Verse 1 and 2. It says, his foundation on the holy mountains. The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Okay. Now this is another one of the Psalms of Ascent. Okay. For walk up the mountain. And this idea, appears a couple of times in the scriptures about there are higher mountains in the world. Why are they jealous of this mountain that God's chosen? I don't know if any of you have ever heard the English translation of the song Finlandia, but the man who did Finlandia, it was written by a citizen of Finland after the Russians had taken over Finland. I don't know if you know much history about it, but where Finland is, just there, Finland has been taken over and released by Russia almost, like an accordion, it's just, so, but anyway, and the song I think is probably one of the most beautiful things, but he says, I've seen the sunsets in Russia and they're as beautiful as the sunsets in Finland. Why do they need Finland? I've seen the mountains of Russia. They're as beautiful as the mountains in Finland. Why do they need Finland? He goes through this whole thing about what it is and then why this whole thing. And I think this with regard, we do not realize what each one of us brings to that puzzle. But no person's peace is better than any person's peace. Like I would think of Mother Teresa's peace is better than all of ours probably put together. But the fact of the matter is, it isn't. It's just that she made her peace very public and obvious. So you and I see it much stronger. But she doesn't hold a stronger peace than any other person here. The thing is, we've never put them together. We don't share that kind of thing. And that's because the whole world has told us it's a coincidence. I have a message for you. That's a lie. So anyway, he says, splendid things, verse 3, splendid things are spoken of you, O town of God. And the next verse, which is 4, let me recall Rahab and Babel to my families. Look, Phoenicia and Tyre, together with Cush. This one was born here. So he's talking about different people. Rahab, I think that refers to a woman, but she was from Jericho. So they're basically talking Jericho when they say, recall Rahab. Babel, that's a shortage of Babylon with to my father, so I remember them. Phoenicia is basically the Philistines had the whole coast of Israel. And so that would be the cities along the coast of Israel. Tyre is that island used to be an island off Lebanon. And Tyre was probably the richest city in the entire world at the time. It was a banking city. And it was on an island that was entirely circled by rocks. You could hardly stop ships there. It was totally fortified. And the first person to conquer it was Alexander. And what Alexander did was take all the people he had captured on the tour and made them build a ramp right across the sea to Tyre. And since then, when the ocean comes down, it's built up land along there. But if you ever look at a map of Lebanon, you'll notice there's like a bubble that sticks out. That was where Tyre was, and that's it was conquered. Tyre. Cush is Ethiopia. Okay, there was a period of history where all the pharaohs were black, where Ethiopia actually conquered Egypt. And so the pharaohs were black, and then goes back to white again. And ultimately, this one was born here. And it's the idea that, people talk about where they're from. And I always thought it was funny that when you're traveling, that if people ask where you're from and you say the United States or America, it's, nice, that sort of thing. But when you say California, people's faces light up. I don't know what they think of California, but they suddenly think this is special. But the idea is that where I have been born is in the baptismal font. You know, for them, they would say the idea here is that I've been born in Jerusalem, okay, which, you know, and everybody looks in awe. The ancient world, probably the big thing was Rome, because if you had Roman citizenship, you had real immunity in the whole world. But this idea that the great pride is where we're born is in fact in the baptismal font. I have been born into the family of God by God's choice. And of Zion it shall be said, every person is born in it. He, the Most High, makes it firm founded. He says, ultimately, everyone would be proud to say, I was born in Jerusalem. Now, in Judaism, if you are a Jew, let's say, and born in New York, or a Jew born in Mexico or something, you still hold you're born in Jerusalem because that's your faith. In the same way we hold about being born in the baptismal font. We are born in the baptismal font, and they're born by ancestry in Jerusalem. It says, the Lord inscribes in the roll of peoples, this one was born here. So not only have I been born there, but the Lord has inscribed in the birth book, you know, he was born in the baptismal font. He was born into my family. And singers and dancers alike, all my well springs are in you. Okay. And this power of what it is, I often tell people that, you know, in traveling a lot, you have to remember your American citizenship, because ultimately you hope to come back to the United States when you're traveling. But it entails certain things like I really like beautiful art, and probably some of the most beautiful art I've ever seen is art in China of crucifixes carved entirely out of ivory with the cross out of that black ebony. And just, they're staggeringly beautiful. And they're less than $100 even, you know. But the fact of the matter is I can't carry it into the United States. You can't carry ivory in. So they can talk anything about the price. They can talk anything, you know, any kind of discussion can go on. My passport says no ivory, okay? And when you travel as an American, you think that way. I like the, you know, the young lady with regards to the, what was it, marijuana she brought in. I don't have a lot of sympathy for something like that. That's actually a violation of their laws, you know, but you learn to do all of this. But I always take it back to the ultimate, you know, I carry my baptismal certificate. That is a citizenship in the country where I intend to return to and intend to live forever. It's good not to violate that. It's good to be aware when I come before God for judgment, I'm not carrying anything I can't take into where I want to go. And this whole idea of keeping always before your mind, your first citizenship is heaven. It should govern everything we do and how we do it. This is Psalm 88, a psalm of the Korahites for the lead player on the Mahalath to sing out a maskil for Haman the Ezrahite. This obviously was a song that was written for a person and then probably offered to the temple as a gift. This was a very common thing in the ancient world. I think, you know, there were minstrels going around all the time composing songs. But if you really wanted to honor someone, you would hire the minstrel to sing a song honoring that person, okay? Now, if the person was very well educated, you could have it written and given to them, but most people didn't read and write. So the idea was the singing of the song. It says, Lord God, verse 2, Lord God of my rescue, by day I cried out, by night in your presence. And so the idea of the prayer is consistent. I keep calling it, as God calls us to pray consistently. May my prayer come before you, incline your ear to my song. Okay, so the prayer is contained in the song as we present it. I am sated with evils, and my life has reached the brink of Sheol. This sated with evils because of the life on the brink of Sheol probably refers to sickness. That, I'm having all these problems, everything, so I am near death, okay? I was counted among those who go down to the pit. I became a person without strength. Among the dead, cast away like the slain, those who lie in the grave, whom you no more recall. They are cut off by your hand. And this idea that the person is so sick, they're basically consigned with the dead, that they deal with them. I guess it means they're on hospice, okay? But this idea, they're basically consigned, that they are not going to recover. This is the process of dying. And he says they are cut off by your hand. And what he's referring there, that death is actually God's action, when the life ends, this sort of thing. He says, you put me in the nethermost pit, in darkness, in the depths. Your wrath lay hard upon me, and your breakers you inflicted. All your breakers you inflicted. And so it's just, this is a real lament for someone who's in a terrible state physically. He said, you distanced my friends from me. You made me disgusting to them. Imprisoned, I cannot escape. And this is, you find this in Job, that when a person is in really bad straits, you stay away from them. And it's, I think it's, my grandmother one time, she lived to be very elderly, but I was asking her one time, I think she was in her early hundreds or late 90s. And I told her, I said, it's amazing how healthy you are. And you never complained about anything. And she told me something I found to be true. She says, all old people hurt, but if you talk about it, people won't speak with you. What a wise woman. What a wise woman. That's what he's saying here. He says that, they can complain about these things and my friends move away. My grandmother said, you never explain a problem to someone who can't help you with it. Period. If someone can help you with a problem, by all means, let them know. They're delighted to help. But it's a very difficult thing to hear someone's problem and not be able to do anything about it. It's a really difficult thing. And that burden shouldn't be put on other people. He says, my eyes ache from affliction. I called on you, Lord, every day. I stretched out to you my palms. Will you do wonders for the dead? Will the shades arise and acclaim you? Shades are what they call people after they go into Sheol. And he's basically saying there, I'm praying to you, I'm honoring you, and I won't be able to do that when I'm dead. I won't be able to petition or anything. When I'm dead, that's it. And so if you're going to move, now's the time to do it. So he calls on God in that way. So we'll call it there and pick it up the next time. I think you got the registration cards. And when we come back, it will be on, this is 88. 88, 12. And the other thing, I've had a number of people, I think, are going to order this book, and I think it's a good book to study, but there is a real advantage during a study like this to have a different translation than I do, because that helps to make the text richer for you. I have a book, you can't buy it anymore now. I've had people try and steal it even, but I have a book that has 26 simultaneously translations of the Christian scriptures. And so that you open up a verse and it will give you the verse basically out of the King James. And then it gives you the variance of everything up to the publication of the First Jerusalem Bible. It's just, but that's your best chance of getting the full meaning. Anyway, thank you very much.